Okay, let us get started because I have a lot of material to cover. Hello everyone, my name is Dr. K. Narayan and I want to welcome you to this workshop. I see a lot of new people here, so just to give you a very brief introduction about myself, I have a background in physics. Specifically, I have a PhD in quantum mechanics, but I've also been reading and studying different spiritual traditions since I was, I would say, 15 years old. And in the last year, I have kind of synthesized these two different streams of trying to understand how reality works, one being science and the other being spirituality, in a single framework. Now, I'm not the only one. There are lots of people who have a background in science, and at that point, they also have understanding of spiritual principles and they are teaching in their own ways about what reality is and what our purpose for being here is. So with that background, this webinar is a slightly advanced webinar because I'm going to go about grace, karma, and yoga. Some of you may have heard the term karma, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that. So let's get started. The spiritual journey starts when we understand that we are not the body nor the mind, but we are the pure consciousness that is aware of the body mind. Now, as a concept, this is not very hard to understand. When we say my house, it is clear that we are separate from that house. Similarly, when we say my mind, it's clear that we are not our mind. The trouble arises because in practice, that is not our experience. To properly experience that we are not the body, we will need to have an out-of-body experience. Some of us might have had that experience, but for most of us, that's not the case. So how do we explain reality in that case? Well, in the past, actually decades, the concept of virtual hyperreality has come into the picture. To give an example, let's take a look at this picture. This is a flight simulator. A flight simulator can give you the experience of flying without actually flying. If we could have a perfect flight simulator, there would be no way for you to tell whether you were actually flying or just experiencing flying as an artificial construct. Physical reality works the same way. It's a simulation so that our true being, which is the self, can experience, learn, and grow. This is where the concept of karma comes in. Karma, the word means action. So in this reality, the way we learn is through our actions. And in that sense, karma is the accumulated learning over many, many incarnations. To take an example, let's take love. If you were to explore facets of love, there are just so many of them. It will be impossible for you to explore all of them in a single lifetime. When we think of love in our society, this is mostly associated with romantic love or extensions such as love for children or parents or family. But love can also be impersonal, such as the love for creative endeavors, love of literature or science. Love can also extend to much higher levels, such as love of entire humanity, and so on. As part of this learning, this learning can sometimes become unbalanced. So, for example, let's say we want to learn about power. As part of the learning, we acquire the power, but then we abuse it to harm others. At this point, the learning has become unbalanced. To balance this learning, you might have to learn what it feels like to be without power and experience what transgressions of power feel like. Now, this is not a judgment. You are an infinite and timeless being because you are part of the source. So who can judge you? It is just that your learning about abuse of power is an incomplete lesson that needs to be balanced with a higher perspective which can only be acquired by being on the other side. The practical aspect of karma is that our current actions shape the future conditions of our learning. These conditions include the theme, circumstances, people, events, and so on. This is not different from being in a classroom. The way you handle the current lessons is going to determine when and how you get the next lessons. But if we go to an even deeper level, karma is not just your actions, but the potential or the tendencies that produce these actions. Now, the issue we face here is that those unconscious tendencies can become binding. This is similar to how we have addictions that can trap a personality. Just as human personality can become addicted, the soul can develop patterns and then become trapped by negative tendencies. And this is where grace comes into the picture. Grace is the ever-present principle that counterbalances karma. Without grace, the tendencies will become a downward spiral, because the longer you stay on a negative path, the harder it becomes for you to reverse course and then go on to a positive path. Let's take an example. Let's say someone hurts you. You might have a tendency to want to get even and hurt them back. Of course, what does that get in return? Even more conflict and use of force on both the sides. This would be a situation where the two of you have become karmically involved and attached to each other. Now, if this tendency of using force and vengeance is very strong in both of you, there is a potential that it can play out over many incarnations. But you can break the cycle by invoking grace, and at the personal level, invocation of grace is through forgiveness. Instead of going in the spiral of confrontation, if you forgive, that karmic balance, the karma is balanced. Now, true forgiveness is realizing that there is nothing to forgive. Since you are an infinite and timeless being, who can hurt you? The hurt that you are holding on to is merely a distortion that you have become emotionally attached to. Once you realize that, you are free to let go, and that is the freedom from karma. Now that was personal grace. I'm going to talk about cosmic grace, which is the path of yoga. The word yoga means union. And this is the science of uniting the individual self with the source. Now, to be accurate, since you are already a part of the source, there is nothing to really unite. This unity is just a realization, similar to waking up from a dream. If you ever dreamed of being in a prison and suffering, that's an illusion. The moment you wake up, you see that that was an illusion that was causing you suffering, and there was no reason for it. So this is the human experience. In our normal consciousness, we don't realize that we are part of the source. So true yoga is that understanding that comes when you realize, when the drop realizes that it is one with the ocean, because the same material that makes up the drop makes the entire ocean. Now, the implication of yoga is that the true union automatically leads to the balancing of karma. The approach in yoga is highly customized to the individual. In other words, yoga does not say that there is a single path that everybody is required to travel. There are as many paths as there are people. So from this background, each one of us is going to approach yoga in a different manner. In classical yoga, there are 4 high-level aspects. And I'm going to talk about these 4 different aspects of yoga. The first path is the path of knowledge. And in Sanskrit, it's called Jnana Yoga. This is for people who are primarily intellectual. Have you ever seen people, all they want to do is think and analyze and think some more? This is for, so the path of knowledge is for the intellectuals. The second facet is the path of action, also called the Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is for people who are primarily physical, who want to do things instead of intellectualizing things. The third path is the path of devotion, called Bhakti Yoga. This is for people who are emotional. They are not intellectual, they are not physical, but they are mostly driven by their emotions. And lastly, there is yet another path called the path of Kriya, or energetic transformation. That is for people who want to work with the deeper dimensions of existence. So that would be your energy body, and then transform the human experience from the inside out. Now, just to clarify, these are not separate paths. Just as physics is not entirely separate from chemistry. Physics and chemistry are 2 different disciplines in the ultimate pursuit of science. So in the same manner, different paths of yoga are separate disciplines in the ultimate pursuit of union. I'm going to go into a little bit detail about these different disciplines. Let's start with the path of knowledge. This is also known as Vedanta, which means culmination of the Vedas, or non-duality. The goal is to realize that the entire existence is a manifestation of the source. From this realization, it naturally follows that you are a portion of that same source. Just to give you the contrast, this means you are not a sinner. You are not a bundle of animal instincts. You are also not a random probability accident, but you are the intelligent energy that powers this entire cosmos. Second, everyone else, and in fact, everything else, is also a portion of the source. The same intelligent energy that is you has become every human being, every animal, every plant, and so on. From this realization, the second aspect of yoga arises, and that is the path of action. This path is the answer to the question, how should we live in a way that honors the source? This is the path of offering yourself through selfless service. Now let me clarify a few things. Selfless service does not mean sacrificing yourself. It also does not mean abstaining from joy or even simple pleasures of life. Remember, you are part of the source. And if you don't honor yourself, you are not honoring the source. This is why the path of selfless service is not an easy path, because it requires a high level of consciousness. To offer yourself on this path, first of all, you have to believe in yourself that you have something to offer. Second, you have to get past your fears of inadequacy or lack of trust. Then, you have to find a balance where you are honoring yourself as well as others. Lastly, it also requires will. Once you start walking on this path, you are going to face temptations. It's very easy to get lost in ego consciousness and how great and holy you are. And the moment this feeling of being special gets to your head, you stop being of service. The other way this path requires will is because you are going to swim against the current of mass consciousness. You might have to go against institutions or people who are deeply addicted to power. And there is one thing that you can find a lot of on this planet are people who are absolutely addicted to power. When you face that resistance, do you still continue to serve with the purity of heart, or do you become discouraged and quit? The purity and strength of your will is going to determine what happens. Let's talk about the third path, the path of devotion. This is the path of surrendering yourself to the divine. This is where you are willing to let go of your own small notions of what life is supposed to be, or what you are supposed to get, and instead you are willing to become an instrument for the higher will. Now, this might sound like a paradox. If you are already part of the source, what is there to surrender, right? Well, actually, a lot. In particular, the practical way you surrender yourself is by surrendering the fruits of your actions to the source. In the true sense, that is the true detachment from results. Again, this is extremely hard to do in our results oriented society where the worth of what you are doing is tied to things that other people can see. But on the path of devotion, you don't measure what you are doing by simple things such as the number of likes or subscribers to your message, but by the purity of your service to the source. The fourth path is the path of energetic transformation. This is the path of working with your energy body and purifying and preparing it so that it can become an instrument for higher energies. I'm not sure how many of you have read Autobiography of a Yogi, but you might be familiar with the word Kriya from there. Now, there is an entire system of purification which starts with the purification of the body, then goes to the mind, emotions, and so on. This is sometimes also called Raja Yoga or Hatha Yoga. So far, what I have covered are the popular and, in some sense, well-known aspects of yoga. What I'm going to cover now are the higher and mystical aspects of yoga, which have been traditionally hidden from the public view. The reason they have been hidden is because it requires a certain level of consciousness before you can start working with tools of higher energy. In classical systems of yoga, this particular knowledge is transferred only through carefully selected students, and as a matter of fact, the student would be required to spend at least 12 years in the process of purification and study before being initiated in these higher concepts. But the times have changed, and so have the higher energies, and we are entering an age where these concepts are in a stage of being widely disseminated. So let me cover the foundations before I go into details. In the core yogic philosophy, the source, which is also known as the Supreme Self, has 5 functions. 3 of these can be easily perceived, and these are creation, sustenance, and then dissolution of the universe. The remaining functions of the source require deeper wisdom to see. The 4th function is to conceal. The source conceals itself in its own creation and forgets that it is the source. This is pretty much the human condition. Those of you who are slightly advanced might have heard of the term the veil. The veil conceals our true nature, and that's why we don't perceive ourselves as divine. And that's where the 5th function of the source comes in, and that is to reveal. This is the lifting of the veil, where the individual consciousness knows itself as the source. So this particular aspect of yoga goes beyond teaching. It cannot be taught, but it has to be transmitted. Now, to make this concept clear, let's think of something simple. Let's say you have a willingness to grow a garden. You have beautiful soil, you have all the instruments, and you are willing to do the work, right? What is it going to take you to grow the garden? There is one thing that you need that you cannot produce yourself, and that is a seed. Once you have the seed has an intelligence that's built into itself, that it can take the nutrition and grow into a tree. But somebody has to give that seed to you. Now, in classical yoga, this concept is known as Kundalini. Kundalini is the intelligent source energy that powers our body, emotions, consciousness, and so on. Think of a play, or think of a movie theater. The images that you see on the screen, the sound that you hear, everything is powered by electricity, right? Even though it might have very different manifestations, it's the same electricity that's powering the show. In the similar way, this energy that's powering the entire show is the energy of Kundalini. This energy has two aspects. The simple aspect, which is manifest in all of us, is the powering of basic human energies. But there is also a divine aspect of this energy. And that aspect has to do with the power to know oneself as the source. And this aspect is typically dormant. So in yoga, it is said that everybody has Kundalini, but that is dormant or asleep. The one who can awaken that energy in you is the guru. Now let's become very clear. The guru is not a teacher. The guru is not an intellectual. The guru is not just a holy man or a saint or any one of them. The guru is the one who has the seed and can give you the seed. Now, of course, this becomes highly mystical, and for each true guru, there are hundreds of fake gurus, and we have to use our own judgment and intellect to discern what is true and what is not. So, my goal is to give you at least two paths here, which I personally recommend, and I'm also going to give you the resources that you can research yourself and find if either of one of them will work for you. The first path is called Isha Yoga, and the initiation that is offered through this path is called Shambhavi Kriya. We are in a really great time at this point because the founder of Isha Yoga, that is Sadhguru, is alive today. And he frequently travels the world to offer this initiation. Because of the COVID situation, rest of the year I think he's not traveling, but I hope he will be traveling back again next year. And my recommendation is, I'm going to tell you the book that goes more into about his life, but read the book and see if this is a path for you. The second path is called Siddha Yoga, and the initiation that they give is called Shakti Path, which literally means transmission of energy. This transmission of energy is identical to Kundalini awakening. The person who started this path was Swami Muktananda, and he started this in 60s and 70s. And he was actually one of the first modern day gurus who was able to transmit this energy to a large amount of people in a single session. Usually this path is concealed. So typically gurus will only transmit this energy to a few disciples in a year, and they will not do a mass initiation. But Swami Muktananda traveled all around the world and he started this Shaktipat program. He has taken Mahasamadhi, which is the eventual passing of a saint, but his disciple, Swami Chidvilasananda, is still continuing with this path. They offer this Shaktipat initiation around October every year. This year is again special, and they are not offering it because it requires in-person transmission. But the beauty of this is called a global Shaktipat, which means on the same day, the initiation happens across multiple cities around the world. And I encourage you next year to check out. And once again, I'm going to refer to the book that talks about this path. Now, before I go further, let me just give a word of caution. There are many, many kinds of gurus. And there are many people on the planet who can actually awaken Kundalini. But just as there are thousands of doctors, right? You would not go to a doctor just because he has the tools and he can cut you open. Similarly, you should not just choose a guru or find somebody who can give you Kundalini awakening just because they charge you only $50. This path is a sacred path. So make sure you get started with somebody who has that high level of consciousness. Let me give you the books and the resources that talk more about these things. First one is, this is a classic. This is called An Autobiography of a Yogi. This was written by Paramahansa Yogananda. This book has been in print for almost a century now. And this goes into more details about what yoga is from one yogi's perspective. The second book I'm going to recommend is called Sadguru, More Than a Life. This is a biography of Sadguru and what his mission is. And lastly, the book that is autobiography of Swami Muktananda is called The Play of Consciousness. This is more about his own spiritual journey. So as I said before, I would recommend read all three of them. See what resonates with you and see if one of these teachers can fulfill your need. Okay, I am done with the webinar. There are just a few things having to do with announcements. The first one is coming up in 2 weeks, and it's an Q&A on reincarnation and the veil. I touched on it a little bit. Reincarnation is the process where we come into physical reality, and then at the end, we exit this system of reality to be in a reality that's the permanent home. And we come here to learn, and sometimes, I would say most of the times, the learning happens over many, many lifetimes. The second webinar is honoring our body as a temple of the divine. I'm going to go into the latest research in nutrition, exercise, and all the philosophical foundations of how to honor yourself in terms of your physicality as divine rather than a second grade or lower nature of our being, which is the problem. And Unfortunately, that's how most religions treat the body. Lastly, we have a website where you can find more resources. Most of these are spiritual, but some of them are also have to do with body, physicality, exercise. Actually, let me just briefly bring it up. And the events that we have are also posted there. The website is www.childrenofinfinity.org. So if you go to the website, you can have the resources are in the recommendations section. This has resources about channeled information, also about nutrition, exercise, and so on, NDEs, and also on science. These are the books that I recommend if you are interested in science. And the second thing is, if you want to see which events we have coming up and how to sign up for them, this is Reincarnation and the Veil, which is in 2 weeks, and then Honoring Our Body as a Temple of the Divine, which is in 3 weeks. All right, so I'm done with the workshop, and it's the time to take questions. Any questions? Any questions about this material? Question from Benjamin. What are your opinions about Buddhism? To be honest, I have not studied Buddhism in any detail, so I don't think I'm qualified to answer this question. But in general, I am a little skeptical of all religions because typically the way they work is they take the power away from you and then they offer the power as part of institutional indoctrination. But if it works for you, my approach is, if it works for you, take it. If it does not work for you, feel free to leave it. Sorry for the miscommunication about the webinar time. There was no webinar at 10 a.m. This is the only webinar. Question from Dean, will we be able to view this webinar later on YouTube? Yes. The same link that you have will work in future as a video that you can watch anytime. Question from Andrea, is it mandatory to have a guru? Can inner vision guide us? It's entirely possible, but just as you would not want to explore physics on your own without ever reading any books or ever going to college, it's always good to have a guide. That's my take. Question, when seeking guidance, how would I know one who I can learn from. It's rather simple. When you listen to somebody's teaching, you can see whether it's rooted in love or it's rooted in fear. The moment you see teachings rooted in fear, it's time to run away from them. Heidi, this material is still being edited where it will be put as videos. But as I said, all the past webinars are still available on YouTube on the same links where you attended them. So just as this link will work after the webinar is done and you can watch it as a replay, so you can watch all the other ones. What can we do in the meantime since gurus are not traveling? You can always take up your own practice. And I would say, find out what works for you. Even though meditation and yoga are highly recommended, there are many, many ways to truly express yourself, and they all work for your spiritual growth. There is a video on this website that's called, I think, Living with Joy, that goes more into details about that. Question from Gina. I have a question about the whale. Can you elaborate? Well, you don't remember anything that happened before you were born. Now, if reincarnation is true, why don't you have that memory? And the reason is, before you incarnated in this reality, you agreed that you are not going to have that memory anymore. And that's called a veil. Now, the veil is sometimes lifted in near-death experiences. It can also be lifted if you reach a certain high level of consciousness. So that is the veil. The book on Siddha Yoga is called, let me go back, The Play of Consciousness. Question from someone, is the out-of-body experience real? I would say it is so real, but it is not a common experience. At this point, there are hundreds of, actually I would say millions of people who have had an out-of-body experience, and these are becoming more and more common because through medical advancement, we have reached a stage where we are able to keep people alive in situations where they would normally die. So in that sense, when the consciousness leaves the body, but somehow we can preserve the body, it comes back. Okay, again, I see some people are not very comfortable with the recommendations that I have, and I would say again, your path is totally your path, and do not let anybody have authority over you. If you do not like what I have shared, or if you do not like what I have recommended, this is not a path for you, and I am happy that you can find your own path. This is without any judgment. So every human being is part of the source, and hence every path that a human being takes is a valid path. So honor yourself, and that's all I recommend. There are so many questions. Sorry, I think there are too many questions. I'm just reading over them, and I'll try to answer them. Where am I located? I'm located near New York. Question from Dave: what do you mean by non-duality? That's a great philosophical question. And the answer is, just as I think partially gave the answer, just as the same electricity manifests in different forms, which appear to be totally separate from each other, we all arise from the same source. And everything that appears to be separate is just an illusion. Question: what actions do you recommend when a family member hurts you? There are a few parts to this. Number one is, you have to reach the understanding that you have to honor yourself as well as the other person. And sometimes that means getting away from people whose only sense of power comes by hurting others. That being said, it's also our responsibility to forgive them, because the forgiveness is not for them, the forgiveness is for us. By not forgiving, we hold on to those experiences and then they become a burden for us. So, make sure you create a situation in which you can honor yourself as the other person, as well as the other person, and then forgive them. Question: can a guru plant the seed through a book? It's entirely possible. And I know that, especially in the case of Swami Muktananda, people got initiation just by looking at his picture. But that's very rare. Question: can a guru take a non-physical form? Yes. Question from Diana: do we have control of our future, or has it already been determined by source? I'm glad you answered that. I'm glad you asked that question, because nothing has been determined by the source, because you are the source. So, this present moment, there are a million possibilities of what you can do in this moment, and all of those are going to affect how the future turns out. Thinking that everything has been predetermined is, first of all, wrong, because probabilities don't work that way. And second, it's also very disempowering. If everything has already been determined, then what's the point of doing anything? Question: can just listening to mantras be beneficial? If you are just starting on the path, I would say the simplest way is to follow your own joy. Find one thing that makes you really spiritually joyful. It doesn't have to do anything with meditation or mantra or anything. If playing sport or dancing or reading a book, any of these things, or walking in nature, if these things really connect you to your inner source, that's the first thing you can get started with on the spiritual journey. Question: I suffer from depression. How can I overcome this with my spiritual practice? Before going on the spiritual practice, I would recommend taking a physical practice. There are some resources on my book, on my website. There's a book called, I think, Spark, The Revolutionary Science of Exercise and the Brain. Read that book. I think that will help you. Question from Sarah: how do I do yoga and meditation? I would say, if you want to start with meditation for 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, just find a place where you can quiet down your mind. And the key is not to reach a state where you have no thoughts. The key is to become aware of your thoughts. There are lots of information online where you can find how to meditate and simple methods that can help you. So I would say start with that. Question, if the out-of-body experience is real, where is the place they go? Great question. And I would answer with an example. I think I gave the example of the flight simulator. Let's say you were a pilot. Somebody brought you inside that flight simulator, and you have no knowledge of whether it's real or not. In your experience, it will appear to be real. But then when you step out of that flight simulator, you realize that it was just a simulator. It was not real. So this is the same with life and death. When we are in this reality, since we don't remember where we came from, this appears to be the only reality. And the other example I can give you is waking up from a dream. When you are dreaming, that is the reality that you experience. But the moment you wake up, that reality is known to be unreal, and then you are in a different reality. So it's the same way. When you exit this system of reality, you go to your real home, which lies outside of this simulation. Question from Faith, is there any way I can get access to the PowerPoint? So this entire presentation is put in form of a video, which is available on this YouTube channel. Question from Diana again. Do we have the power as source to determine our future or manifest things? Or has it been predetermined? Think of this life as a college. The way you learn is going to determine the next set of learning. Now, with the commercialization of spirituality, it has become very fashionable to manifest things and circumstances. But a deeper spiritual wisdom lies in understanding that everything that's there in your life has a purpose. So the point is not to throw it away and get something else. The point is to make the best of what you already have. And that is, first of all, by making peace with what you have. And second, by using it for your own growth. So nothing is predetermined. It's all coming into being as you make choices. Question from Heidi. What's your opinion on attempting to open the third eye? I would say these are higher aspects of consciousness, and it is advised that you always take on these practices with a guide. It does not mean that it cannot happen, but it's always better to have a guide, especially if you are doing something that's really high energy. Question, can I awaken my Kundalini? This is an extremely, I would say it's more, for most people, it's an extremely difficult path to wake this energy yourself. It's doable, but again, depending on your state of being, it might take you years. And then even then, there is no guarantee. Question from Mona. You mentioned the balance. What is it and who decides? In the context of karma, when you take actions which violate others or even violate yourself, those actions take you out of balance. They become unbalanced. And think of a spiritual curriculum. You came here to learn about something. Now, if you do not learn the right way, or if you do not learn the right lesson, or if you abuse your power, and abuse also applies to yourself. So for example, if you are in a relationship that does not serve you, and that relationship is actually, it does not honor you, but you are in that relationship and you stay still in that relationship, you have learned the lesson of helplessness. So when you go back, you are going to review this lifetime and think, was that the right thing and the right lesson I learned? Because from the perspective of the source and being the source, there is no such thing as helplessness. So this was a distortion that you picked up. Now, since we are infinite beings, typically you would come back in another life and try to correct that distortion. And that is what I mean by balance. Question, how do you feel about Eckhart Tolle? I like him. I highly recommend his books. Great question from Jan. Can you elaborate on the importance of being in self-balance when giving of yourself in volunteering to the community? Great question. And this is, I think, where cultivation of wisdom comes into the picture. In any relationship, whether it's one-on-one relationship or anything else, there is always two extremes which are very, very easy to pick up. The first extreme is when you let others walk over you and you take care of their needs, but you don't take care of your own needs. The other extreme is when you only care about yourself and then you walk over others to get what you want. The true balance is in the center, but it's not just a basic transaction. This is an understanding that they are a part of source. You are a part of the source. So the service that's offered is offered as an honor. It's not a chore, but at the same time, you have to honor yourself. So you have to know, you have to draw the line where you see that what you are investing in is not really helping them. It's just making them more and more dependent on you. And that is when service stops being service. So if you reach that point, you are not helping anybody anymore. You are just teaching others how to take advantage of you. Question from L. Bar. I suffer from chronic depression. Nothing helps me. I would say read some books. So this is, see, any physical ailment, including chronic depression, has causes. And if you have the will, it can be overcome. It's not that this is an incurable disease. I would say find out, first of all, look into your own nutrition. Second, get on some kind of exercise program because exercise has been shown to be as effective as drugs. Third is find people that you can really connect with. Yes, actually, I see that lots of people also put more comments there. Okay, this is a more personal question. When was your Kundalini awakened and how? I actually took an initiation with Siddha Yoga. That was in 2011. Question from Richard, should I jump into the initiation? Yes, I would highly. So initiation is where the true spiritual journey begins. True spiritual journey is not about reading books. It's not about an intellectual understanding of your true nature. It's about getting that seed. And when you get that seed, you will know what it feels like. How do spirituality and reincarnation play out for animals? From my research, it seems like the animal consciousness can graduate into human consciousness. So, to as a foundational material, everything in this universe is conscious. It's just that it's conscious in its own way. So, the rock that we see is conscious, except it's a different kind of consciousness. And similarly, a plant that we see is also conscious. So in that sense, animals are conscious in their own way, but they do not have the same growth of consciousness that we see in human beings. But through love, their consciousness graduates to those of human beings. If you are interested to learn more about this material, I would recommend works by Dolores Cannon, and she talks about these things in her research. Why do people say Kundalini is dangerous? Again, if you are working with power and you are not doing it right, you have the possibility of hurting yourself. So that is the basis behind saying that Kundalini is dangerous. It's not dangerous, it's just energy. And that's why I said it's always best to work with somebody, particularly a guru, who can work with this energy and has the right level of consciousness to help you. Question from David. How do you see science and spirituality being reunited? It's a split that only occurred a couple of 100 years ago. I think it's not a question of science versus spirituality. I think this has become a question of becoming so entrenched in our beliefs that we fail to perceive reality, even though it's right in front of us. So the question is not about science or spirituality, it's about the openness of attitude. You know, even now, there is an entire society which believes in the flat earth. And if you were to engage with one of these people, they are going to give you some very, very logically sounding arguments about why the earth is flat. And no matter what kind of evidence you try to present to these people, they will just not listen. And that is how it has become now with people who say that they are interested in science, but they are only interested in one particular variety of science, and that is materialism. So, but the people who are awakened, in their mind, these two different paths of searching for ultimate reality have already converged, and the convergence happens with quantum mechanics coming into being, because quantum mechanics kind of makes it very clear that consciousness plays a central role in the manifestation of matter. And once you start with that very, very basic principle, it means that it's just one thing. Rosalind, question from Rosalind. You mentioned two types of grace, personal, and what was the second? The first was personal, and the second is cosmic. And that is the one you get. Actually, somebody already answered. Thank you. Where can I get a guide? It's a hard question to answer, because the guide has to have the consciousness and purity of being able to help you. And also it depends on what exactly do you want from a guide. A person who can guide you for nutrition cannot guide you for spirituality, and vice versa. So I would say invest heavily in books and see what kind of research has been conducted so far. And in particular, look at, so I assume you are interested in spirituality, start with the 3 books that I recommended. And then you can read more and see what path comes up for you. Any opinion on psychedelics? Actually, in higher yoga, they are explicitly prohibited. And the reason is they have, once again, it's an issue of power and trying to use things without understanding their true power. And it can mess you up. That's my personal opinion, by the way. But I know that in yoga, not only psychedelics, but even alcohol, tobacco, and if you go to even higher level, even onions and garlic, these things are prohibited because they mess with your internal energies. Now, that being said, I think the next question is about mushrooms. So all of these things are called teacher plants. And there are various spiritual traditions in which people have some kind of experience with teacher plants. But in order, just like you would go to a doctor for the right dose of Tylenol, if you take too much, you know what? It can damage your liver. In the same way, you have to have somebody who can actually work with the energy of teacher plants and understand how much do you need, in what format, and can do the necessary preparation. But thus, such people are very rare. And a person who reaches that level of consciousness does not really need to work with these substances anymore. They can do energy work directly. So I would say my recommendation would be to stay away from them, but that's my opinion. Question, can someone else cause us to become unbalanced? Yes. If they hurt us and we hold on to that hurt, that's how we become unbalanced. Question from Dave, can you please recommend something on health healing? On my webpage, there is a website. One second. Not a website. It's a Netflix movie that I recommend you watch. Let me go here. The movie is called The Game Changers, and it's available on Netflix. Watch it, and this makes, because we are profoundly affected by what we eat. So if you look at this information and apply the principles that they talk about in the movie, it will help you. All right, we still have lots of questions. I'm sorry, actually we have run over, and I apologize if I Again, I apologize for not being able to answer all the questions. We have a webinar that will be there in 2 weeks that is more focused on reincarnation and the whale. I hope I see you guys there, and this is a conversation that will continue to happen. So thanks everybody for joining today.